Welcome everyone to Preparing for Migration. My name is Keith Hochberg. I'm the Vice President of Cloud and Compute Services at Viacom Media Networks.
And my name is Keith Carlson, and I'm responsible for services at Second Watch.
So Viacom Media Networks is a global media conglomerate consisting of brands such as MTV, VH1, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, Nick Jr., Paramount Pictures, TV Land, Spike, amongst many others. And today we find ourselves in a place where we have to modernize and transform the way we deliver content to our audiences, the way we engage our audiences, and the way we measure our audiences. And today we're going to walk you through how we created our cloud strategies just a couple of years ago. We're executing on it today. Some lessons learned, how we worked with Second Watch to plan for that, and how we plan to put ourselves in a position to actually improve the way we deliver content to our audiences. So, what to expect from this session? Developing a cloud strategy that's an actionable, realistic cloud strategy. The selection criteria that we use to select our infrastructure as a service platform. How to approach an actual cloud migration, things that you have to contemplate before you actually do it. The workload and organizational assessment. We'll go into detail on how we assessed our organization and prepared them for this paradigm shift. Develop an application dependency mapping, which we used pretty extensively to create our actual tactical migration plan, and creating an optimized cost estimate for our cloud-ready workloads. So, how our cloud journey began. Viacom is a global media conglomerate consisting of all these distinct businesses. IT consists of infrastructure and a couple of other groups that are shared resources among this global media conglomerate. So it was a pretty daunting task to come up with a cloud strategy. And so what we did was we decided to break our workloads up into classes, and we call them compute classes. Web hosting is your traditional .com, mobile application, video on demand streaming, enterprise applications such as SAP and PeopleSoft, your human resources and legal and finance apps. Media services, which is our content supply chain. Linear distribution, our traditional way of delivering content to set-top boxes in your living room. End user compute, which is email, file services, desktop services, and finally data services, and there are a couple of others that we defined as well. What we quickly came to learn was that technical readiness and organizational readiness and business benefit varied by class. And so going back to what I mentioned before about having to modernize our content delivery, it was logical for us to kind of hone in on web hosting as maybe the first step towards cloud. And so we were thinking private cloud first, then public cloud. Let us get our feet wet with cloud technology, realize some of the benefits. When we started looking at our data center footprint, web hosting was in just a subset of our data centers. So we started to think, well, as we move those workloads to public cloud, this could potentially be a catalyst for data center consolidation. Obvious benefits of cloud are also improved time to market and agility. Going back to us being a shared resource in the middle of this media conglomerate, improving the transparency into the cost of providing the services we provide was very compelling to us. And I'm sure many of you have watched the Video Music Awards or the Kids' Choice Awards or the Movie Awards. The European Music Awards are later this month. We have a lot of tentpole events that require additional capacity for just a couple of hours. And so we are highly virtualized, and we found ourselves having to plan to add this capacity for these events for weeks at a time, and then we would tear them down after the event. And so let's look at MTV, for instance. They have probably about 3 or 4 of these events per year, and what we decided to do just a couple of years ago was leave our capacity at peak, because it didn't pay for us to keep building this infrastructure and then tearing it down. And so for the majority of the year, we were over-provisioned for those workloads. And so a real benefit of cloud is being able to auto-scale for planned events, but then also for unplanned events as well. And geolocating services was also very compelling for us. We have development organizations around the world. We have end users around the world. Sitting desktop environments and development environments in closer proximity to those end users was attractive for us. In addition, on the product side, we build massive multiplayer online games. And so sitting these games in closer proximity to the end user is going to provide a better end user experience as well. So how we began was in early 2014, we launched OpenStack, private cloud. I have a really great group of infrastructure engineers on the web hosting side. I have to say they were great because a lot of them are sitting here. So, so you guys are great, you know, I'm kidding. So they built OpenStack by themselves. They did it in about 9 months. And we realized some benefits. You know, we built heat templates, which are CloudFormation friendly. They were able to do zero-touch deployments of our websites in under 10 to 15 minutes. But we were still managing hardware and software. We only built in one data center, and so we couldn't geolocate services. We started to plan building out in other data centers, and it was a pretty daunting task. And when OpenStack is on a 6-month life cycle, and so when we were finally production ready, we found ourselves planning the next upgrade of OpenStack to realize all the new service capabilities. And at the same time, we would get these emails from AWS and Azure and Google and all these public cloud service providers announcing all these great service capabilities that we thought we could benefit from, and all you had to do was log in and start playing with them. And we were still planning our OpenStack migrations and upgrades. And so we migrated about 1,000 virtual machines, which is roughly 20 to 25% of our environment. We gained some benefit, but we decided to pause. And we only migrated certain sites that were on old physical infrastructure or that we were building heat templates for and that could really benefit from OpenStack. So when we decided to really move towards public cloud and accelerate our move out there, we plucked a guy out of web hosting, sitting in the front row, Chris Lawler. He is our cloud architect. He's looking across our compute classes holistically across the company, partnering with our peers, our customers, and working on strategic experiments on the public cloud outside of web hosting. So he's no longer worried about day-to-day service delivery for our web hosting environment. So we're looking to add to that group. So if anyone is looking for a job, come speak to me or Chris. So we formally defined our public cloud selection criteria, which I'll go through in a little bit. And we obviously started researching and testing public cloud services. And so the criteria that we formalized in our selection process was global presence for some of the use cases I mentioned before. In addition, we also have a pretty large presence in the EU, so we were paying attention to the points of presence for public cloud services in the EU for safe harbor data sovereignty laws. And so the maturity and richness of services and the pace of innovation is something, actually, that probably should be number one. Our take on public cloud and cloud in general is your compute, your network, your storage, those are all utilities. It's like power, you just expect it to work. The value proposition of cloud is really the ecosystem of services around allowing you to manage those utilities. And so we had done OpenStack on our own. Private cloud was a paradigm shift. Public cloud was even a greater paradigm shift. You're relinquishing control in certain cases. Your data's on someone else's infrastructure. You have to be more vigilant from a security perspective. And so we were looking for an infrastructure as a service provider that provided enterprise support, had a rich ecosystem of partners in case we needed to call someone in or leverage a software that we already run on-prem that we wanted to run on the public cloud. And the pricing model was also important to us. So past on-demand and reserved instances and spot, we were also looking for different levels of IOPS that you could provision, different instance sizes. Amazon just announced a couple of weeks ago a cheaper S3 that we're looking at. And so our belief there is that we can better right-size our workloads and obviously reduce our cost. The ability to show back cost of a workload, I've already gone through that, and direct connect options. And so our environment's pretty large, it's complex, it's 4,000 virtual machines, a couple of hundred applications approaching 1,000. We knew we were migrating web hosting. And so we knew we were going to be in a hybrid state for some time. The environment is pretty interdependent on one another, a lot of platform services running. And so we wanted a direct connection from our data center to the public cloud for performance and reliability. So here we are, we're testing public cloud services. We're at reInvent just last year, and speaking to customers, hearing customer stories up here, we concluded that AWS was the right choice for us. So then we immediately started shifting focus to how are we going to deliver. We had to keep the lights on in OpenStack. Some of our flagship websites are already running there. We have an older legacy virtual environment that we had to keep the lights on. we had to start selling it to upper management. Paradigm shift, we were always saying we should go to public cloud, but we want to do it slowly. Now we wanted to accelerate it. So there were business culture issues to tackle, security implications, and we also had to secure budget. So you're moving from CapEx to OpEx, and that was something that we had to figure out. We wanted to conduct a cloud readiness assessment, but we weren't quite sure actually what that was. We had some ideas. And so we started questioning whether or not we could do this on our own. And so it's a total paradigm shift going to public cloud. It's more than a technology shift. And we needed to understand the total cost of ownership. These smart guys that had built OpenStack started deploying our foundational architecture on AWS, building CloudFormation templates, directory services out there, security services, DNS, NTP, all your standard services. We wanted someone to come in and help us validate. If we're building this from the ground up, we wanted to do it right, but we wanted to do it fast too. So we needed to understand how all of our partners, developers, customers would leverage the platform if we're building it from the ground up. Again, we wanted to do it right. And we weren't quite sure of how our organization was going to be ready for this. We're looking past web hosting, and we wanted to assess our organization both from a culture standpoint and a technical standpoint. And so going back to the business benefit and the state of our business, we want to do this quickly, and we just didn't think that we could do it all ourselves. So we decided we wanted to leverage a partner. We did a formal RFP. We looked at a handful of AWS Premier Partners. That's who we wanted to partner with, someone who had connections at AWS, who could help us guide us through the beginning of the journey. Skill set was an obvious one, meeting some of their engineers and their managers was very important. Doing customer referrals, we wanted them to demonstrate that they had the ability to execute and honestly partner with us to help us figure out what this cloud readiness assessment actually was going to be and to put us in a position to succeed. And we also wanted them to demonstrate that they had done it for customers in our space, the media and entertainment industry. So obviously customer service and a mature team, important as well. So I'll give it away, we partnered with SecondWatch. The Cloud Readiness Assessment. So we started out with operational requirements. SecondWatch actually came in, talked to our key stakeholders. We talked about recovery time objectives, security best practices, backup and recovery, database replication, multi-AZ versus multi-region. And once we collected those requirements and we started laying out how we were going to do this, we were delivered high-level designs, delivered to us as architectural diagrams, VPC layout, network layout, showing direct connect, how we're actually going to do our replication. Detail level designs, which are more detailed than the high-level designs, actually showing how we were going to replicate from multiple AZs and multiple regions, how we were actually going to replicate our databases by database platform, how we're going to manage security groups. The application dependency mapping. So this one, we used software, third-party software from Cloudscape, and Keith will go into more detail later on that. We discovered the networks across the 4 data centers that house web hosting, and we discovered our assets, our workloads. We deeply inspected the sockets that they're listening on. We connected NetFlow, we collected NetFlow and analyzed NetFlow, and what we did was we were delivered a mapping of our application interdependencies, how they talk to each other, the level of chatter, and we built that into our migration plan with SecondWatch to help us reduce the dependencies on our Direct Connect link. And so the cost model and resource tagging was another big one. SecondWatch met with a lot of our business stakeholders. They helped us create an account structure by business unit, by stage, so non-production and production. We can tag our workloads on Amazon, and we can do roll-up billing by business unit, by application. And we're early on in our journey to AWS, but so far it looks really good. Application assessment. So not only did they look at the data, but they met with our application owners and the people that host our applications. And they started to assess them for cloud readiness. The workloads that were cloud ready, they recommended migration methodologies, lift and shift, replatform, and Keith will go more into detail later. For the workloads that are not cloud ready, if a workaround existed, they would recommend it formally as well. And so the actual tactical migration plan that we put together, based on the application dependency mapping, broken up into waves by application platform, by business unit. And again, we're a global media conglomerate. We have developers that are aligned with our business units. They're working day and night on projects for those businesses. Very important for us to be able to forecast when we're going to need their attention on our project, on our migration project. So being able to go in front of the people at Comedy Central saying, we're going to need 3 weeks of your time in October to test all of your applications out there and work on this cutover was very important for our success in migrating. And the workload cost estimate, being able to compare for cloud-ready workloads, reserved instances versus on-demand, if we were to go down to one instance for an application and use auto-scaling, playing around with the numbers and really figuring out budget. Our fiscal year started October 1st. We were delivered the cost estimate in time to really properly forecast for budgeting purposes in FY16. And the staff development plan. So they actually came in, Second Watch, and they interviewed cross-function across all of those compute classes. I was interviewed. They recommended individual training, group training. It was also delivered to us in time so that we could set a training budget for FY16, which was very important for us. And understanding where each group is, and we're paying attention to that in our journey, and sending these people for the training that they need. Your people being able to operate out there and select the right services and the right platforms is very important, and that's the way you're going to really realize benefit out of a public cloud platform, and AWS specifically. So I'll turn it over to Keith, who can speak more about developing the roadmap.
Thank you very much. So when I told my teenage sons that I was coming to Las Vegas to speak at a conference and that there were 20,000 people there, I kind of implied that there were going to be 20,000 people in my session. So I didn't exactly lie, but I do need to prove to them. So first of all, my cool factor went significantly up. Second, when they heard I was speaking with a gentleman from Viacom, they're like, what's Viacom? I said, oh, it's MTV and Comedy Central. There, okay, then my cool factor really went up. Now, my cool factor is going to go seriously up because I'm going to prove to them that this is actually the case. So thank you, Keith, very much. It's really great to be working with another Keith. You can't get us confused. So if you have not heard about Second Watch, certainly you've heard about Viacom. So what is Second Watch? We are a born in the cloud. Andy talked about some born in the cloud system integrators and managed cloud providers. That's us. We were born in the cloud. Cloud only, cloud all the time, not just cloud first. We do nothing but cloud. Second thing, we're the leader in, I consider us to be the leader in designing, managing, migrating, and then managing enterprise clients' workloads to the public cloud. So we're going to talk a little bit about the roadmap and kind of how we teamed with Viacom, because we teamed very effectively with Viacom to accomplish this effort, a very strategic project. Keith gave creds to his team. I'll give creds to my team. Imran Ahmed, who's going to be up here later, runs my practice in the East, as well as several members of my team. J.B. McGinnis, the gentleman in the pink shirt, you cannot miss him. He is, naturally, he's in sales. And he'll be talking to each of you later. So a few things that we went through. So we talked about kind of what the process of the roadmap was and our teams working together. This was about a 10 to 12-week effort. Viacom and Second Watch working together as well. We were powered by a technology called Cloudscape by Risk Networks that we worked very effectively with during the discovery process. But really it was much more than just discovery. We went through an entire organization assessment to ensure that once Viacom got all these applications into the AWS cloud, that it would be able to be managed and fast and reliable and effective and scalable. We put in place the foundational architecture, all the nits and bits that need to be done in order before you really start migrating your applications. We looked at what's the cost model. How are you going to govern this new environment in the cloud? We looked at what was the cost estimate going to be, so there were no surprises once Viacom started migrating. And we then put in place a wave-based migration plan. So the first thing to do when you start a new project like this, executives get all excited and they want to get going right away. They're like, hey, let's get going, let's get the apps, let's start moving them, let's get all that stuff going. Well, hold on. Let's go slow to go fast. Let's ready, aim, fire, not the other way around. And so we often start, and did start in this situation, with an organizational readiness. How is Viacom's organization going to adapt and adopt to this new managed cloud environment? So we brought in our organizational design and change management team. We met with executives, we met with application owners, we met with the infrastructure team, we met with the enterprise architecture team, and we put together a change plan and a training plan to ensure that this team could migrate themselves along with the migration of the application and really be ready when we looked at this 7,000 server, over 1,000 applications, and migrating them to the Amazon cloud. We put in place a scorecard and a training plan to ensure that Keith and his team could then, monitor the progress of his team's progress against that training plan. And then we really looked at something that can tend to get overlooked a little bit as well, and that's, we really thought about designing for manageability. How do you design your workloads and your foundational architecture in a way that once you're up, it takes advantage of all the benefits of the AWS cloud? So things like, how do you design your new incident system, problem management system, automation, security, billing, something highly overlooked and very critical, particularly now that you're not managing physical assets, you're managing cloud assets. And we made sure that we designed in a way that was designed such that the new world was going to be better manageable. So we'll talk about this more when we talk about foundational architecture. The next thing we did is we worked on how are we going to operationalize the public cloud with Viacom. And we put in place what we call a foundation architecture. And the foundation architecture is all about ensuring agility, manageability, scalability. Oh, and by the way, the ability to extend in the future, because it's not just 1,000 apps that Viacom has today, it's several thousand apps that they're sure to develop in the future on the cloud. And we wanted to make sure that Viacom could take advantage of this new toy, these new AWS resources or series of toys in a very practical way going forward. And oh, by the way, we wanted to make sure that Viacom wasn't bringing any of their existing technical debt with them. So that's all went into the design of the foundational architecture. So what goes into a foundational architecture? Well, first of all, there's the foundation of the foundational architecture, of course, which is network topology and security, kind of the core foundations of the foundation. And we made sure that we designed with the best practices and proper strategies in mind there. We then laid in top some of the things that are going to make this scale, a series of shared services, inclusive of Active Directory and LDAP, DR tooling, DevOps tooling, patch management, antivirus tooling, all the stuff that Viacom needed to run their business going forward. So this allowed us to put in place essentially a foundational architecture and the best practices to ensure that once we started apps flowing across into the new environment, they had a great place to land, and that Viacom had a great way to extend that in the future. Okay. Now comes the fun stuff, figuring out what Viacom really had. And we were told 7,000 servers, several data centers. I think it's actually 5 data centers, 4 data centers.
Right in the middle between 3 and 5.
Yep. 1,000+ applications. And so we took a two-pronged approach to discovery, to figuring out what Viacom actually had. And like I said, we leveraged a very powerful tool called Cloudscape, which is by a company called Risk Networks, which really has an automated discovery process, really combed through all of Viacom's assets to really understand connectivity between the applications, discovering what applications, servers of all different types it had, such that when we move the applications, we would know what the potential risk areas were. And then we went through a whole manual process as well, because it wasn't just trusting the data that came out of the tool, which was fantastic, but we had to go verify and talk to people. And so we met with, dozens of folks that actually own the applications. And we'd meet with a team that would own 50 or 100 applications to really understand what they did, such that it could really help paint the whole picture. With that, we were then able to take an honest look at each application and classify each application according to I think it's Gartner's 5 R's: rehost, rebuild, replace, refactor, and revisit. And we could look at each application and figure out what was optimal for each of those different circumstances. And of course, a lot of them were just going to be rehosted. Several of them rebuilt. Few of them actually replaced, potentially with SaaS apps and so forth. In parallel with this, we did a parallel activity, which was really analyzing the dependencies between the applications. What this would allow us to do later was prioritize, because we then eventually were leading to a roadmap, which is a prioritization of which apps go when, and we had to know the dependencies in order to kind of help inform that prioritization process. Okay. Something often or sometimes overlooked as well, and something that you can't go back on, is really proactively thinking and designing your cost model and your governance strategy. Because when you migrate several thousand servers, several thousand applications over to AWS, it's really important to be able to think ahead about some of the questions that are going to get answered, or going to get asked. Why are we spending more than we thought? Chargebacks, showbacks, shamebacks, be able to analyze and provide and have that kind of information, such that the business is getting what they need from a financial perspective, and that the head IT finance is getting what he or she needs out of the system. So we brought in our financial analysts, and we did a whole tagging strategy, really looking at the where Viacom was going in terms of the migrations, and then looking at a tagging strategy and putting in place a tagging strategy, and we tagged everything. And this was, an important kind of best practice. Every conceivable dimension. And we didn't just do it randomly. We did it based on interviews that we did with the business, with the enterprise architecture team, with business ops, with IT finance. And we really looked at, tagging, applications, business units, resource types, et cetera. Many different, a whole tagging strategy that we worked with Viacom to put in place. Another critical element sometimes gets overlooked, thought about after the fact, but remember with tags don't go back retroactively in AWS, they only think forward. So important to do it up front. The next thing we did was really look at the total cost of ownership. And Viacom had done a total cost of ownership in order to justify the project to begin with. And so we wanted to go through the process of validating that. And in doing so, also put in place essentially a new governance model for governing these new applications once they were in the cloud. So we worked on not just a total cost of ownership model, but also a whole financial optimization strategy, how to leverage RIs in the future, how to think about kind of continually leveraging, doing financial optimization, architecture optimization, such that you're continuing to able to take advantage of the benefits of the AWS cloud once all these applications and servers are there. So we did a two-pronged approach here as well. The tool that we leverage, which I mentioned before, Cloudscape, does a really nice job of inventorying the existing environment and mapping the existing environment into AWS, and then doing essentially a performance impact analysis to figure out what's the current spend going to be like in the current environment. And it spits out an as-is inventory report and a performance-based cost report, some really great information. But there was a fair amount of human analysis still required on top of this, because it didn't take into account things like auto-scaling and so forth. And so we really went through application by application, server by server, to validate that report, but also really help determine what the total cost of ownership would be in the future, such that out of this step we had a validated TCO compared to their original TCO, a financial optimization strategy going forward, and an architectural optimization strategy going forward for Viacom. Okay, with all these pieces of the foundation laid, now it came down to really building the roadmap. The roadmap in terms of how Viacom was going to manage and migrate all of these servers and resources and applications over to AWS. And this is a multi-step process and a very intense process. First of all, we had to design every single workload that was going over. We had to design and put in place a design. Once again, a design for manageability, such that once these workloads were in the cloud, they were able to be managed. So we did high-level designs and detailed-level designs using our methodology that we use on every single one of our clients to really design each workload being migrated. We then profiled the apps into similar technical patterns, according to, is it a tiered web app? Is it an app with a high I/O backend? Things like that. We then made recommendations for tools and processes by technical pattern to actually facilitate the migration when Viacom does that. And then we put in place a governance and a team structure for doing the actual migration itself, because it's a pretty hairy effort, and so you want to make sure that it's properly governed. So we put in place essentially a governance and a team structure to make sure that whole migration process was smooth as silk. We developed run books to make sure that we got as much repeatability and automation as possible, and then of course we piloted a couple apps to make sure this thing all worked. So the output really was then a detailed design by workload, a governance structure, a set of run books, and a roadmap that was broken up into waves such that Viacom could accelerate or decelerate those particular waves as it made sense for the business. And this allows Viacom, or will allow Viacom, to really kind of move at the speed that makes most sense to them when they go through this whole process of migrating all these critical applications over to AWS. So that was the process that the team, the joint Second Watch and Viacom team went through, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Keith.
Thank you, Keith. It's really easy working with someone named Keith. I'll never forget your name. So where we are in the journey today, we'll fast forward a couple of months. We end the engagement with Second Watch. We're training our people up. We are building our CloudFormation templates. We're getting ready for the migration. So I was sitting here at reInvent last year, and I heard people up on this stage talking about how they started with their flagship application, or they started with SAP, or they started with PeopleSoft. Let's make sure it's bulletproof. And I thought it sounded weird at the time. And so we're talking about our migration, and we had a pretty high-profile event for our Comedy Central business a couple of weeks ago. Trevor Noah is now the new host of The Daily Show. And so we decided to preemptively move ComedyCentral.com out to AWS because we felt like we could leverage auto-scaling, some of the other services that AWS offers us to successfully host the site through the event. We're expecting increased traffic, high-profile event, and so far it's been a success. We saw a pretty marked performance improvement just by moving it to AWS. We've moved a couple of other development and test workloads, a couple of other production sites, and when we get back in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll probably be migrating anywhere from 800 to 1,000 virtual machines. Thanks, Evan. Evan's managing the project for us now, and so we plan to move about 4,000 virtual machines in our web hosting environment over the next 9 months, and so far it's been a success. We can see the power of the AWS platform. Things like auto-scaling and CloudFormation templates, and even looking at Elastic Cache and Elastic Container Service. A lot of these services, and even some of the announcements that came out today, just being able to go back home and test these services, it's a really powerful platform. And so at the same time, we've talked about a lot of lift and shifts. We're also transforming our infrastructure engineering organization into a DevOps organization, cloud engineering on our infrastructure side. On the development side for web hosting, they are transforming into site or service reliability engineers, and we're planning to go to a continuous delivery, continuous integration model, and we feel that that's going to put us in a better place to compete in this market today as we improve our content delivery B2C. We're also researching new container models. We have one of our development partners is testing the Elastic Container Service. We're partnering with them to get feedback, and we've been passing that on to the AWS product team. We're also building a Kubernetes cluster. We're looking at Mesosphere. Containers is even a further paradigm shift than just running virtual machines out on the public cloud. Try to figure out the operating model around it, security implications. Long term, we could see the potential security benefits, the improved rapid deployment, improving your time to market and agility, the potential for cost reduction. And so we're keeping our eye on that. And now that we know we can actually successfully migrate applications to AWS, we're finalizing our data center consolidation roadmap. So we own and operate way too many data centers today, And so we want to reduce our footprint. So every new project that comes our way, we think, well, cloud first. Can we do it out on the cloud? Is our organization ready? Is the business ready? Is there a real reason why we have to build it on-prem? And so we're formalizing our data center consolidation roadmap. It's going to be multi-year. Obviously, there are financial implications. And then we're also figuring out what to do with all this OpenStack infrastructure. When we abandon it, when we migrate it out to AWS, and we've gone through kind of an analysis, and we're trying to figure out what capital expenditures we can avoid some cost on for FY16 by repurposing our usable infrastructure on the back end. So I hope I walked you through today how we approached our cloud strategy, lessons learned, how we planned with Second Watch, who is a great partner of ours. And I guess, should we turn it over to questions? Yeah? Okay. So thank you, everyone. And also remember to complete your evaluations. Thanks.